Hello, so we're going to continue to look at the Kata case study, and obviously this Kata case study focuses on the impacts of multinational corporations. In particular, the question that we're going to be looking at today is the Slovakian government wants to boost their national economy either via FDI, obviously standing for foreign direct investment, or by technology and skills transfers. Evaluate these two options and recommend which one would be most beneficial to the Slovakian national economy. So, first of all, we can start with some definitions. So, things we may wish to define at the start of our response. We may want to define what a multinational corporation is, because obviously, in the case study, Kata is an example of a multinational corporation. We may wish to define what foreign direct investment is, and we also may want to define what we mean by skills and technology transfers. So half of our answer should focus on the impact of foreign direct investment on the Slovakian economy, and the second half of our answer should focus on technology and skills transfers. So if we consider foreign direct investment first of all, so put a nice subtitle, foreign direct investment there. So positive impacts that foreign direct investment may have. Well, obviously, job creation is going to be the big one that foreign direct investment has. So by investing in Slovakia, setting up the production plant, it were told in the case study, it's going to lead to 8,000 jobs being created. And that's particularly important where we see the national average for unemployment is 10%, which is quite high. So obviously this investment into Slovakia can help to address the high unemployment. So obviously unemployment's going to be reduced within the economy, and that's beneficial, because therefore we would expect to see increased spending in the economy. And the increased spending obviously has come from the greater income that people have, because obviously people are employed now. So increased income, increased spending in the economy, and ultimately that should lead to economic growth, an increase in economic growth within the Slovakian economy. So we've got a fine point to make about why foreign direct investment is going to have a positive impact upon the Slovakian economy due to the economic growth that would be seen. However, we may consider there may be a negative impact with regards to foreign direct investment, or maybe not necessarily a negative, but the positive may not be as good as we have just portrayed. So whether they receive the large amounts of economic growth depends on the number of jobs from that are created in the supply chain. So the benefits of foreign direct investment, as I've just stated, are going to depend on the number of jobs created in Slovakia to supply component parts. Obviously, if all the component parts are produced in Slovakia and then sent to the factory to be used to produce the cars, then fantastic. The loads of jobs are going to be created, and the larger the amount of economic growth that's going to be achieved. However, if all the component parts are imported from abroad, obviously the impact and the creation of jobs within the Slovakian economy isn't going to be so strong, and therefore the increase in economic growth would therefore be minimal. So let's just elaborate upon this point that we've just discussed. So it depends on the number of jobs created in Slovakia to supply component parts. If component parts are imported. Therefore, we're going to have fewer jobs created. And as a result, therefore, there'd be a smaller reduction in unemployment and a smaller increase in economic growth. Okay, so we've considered foreign direct investment as being a positive and considered an issue with regard to that. So that's one particular point we can talk about with foreign direct investment. Another positive point we can talk about with foreign direct investment is obviously that the FDI should generate tax revenue. So obviously Qatar are going to be paying tax. For example, corporation tax. Obviously, when we talk about corporation tax, that's a tax on profit. So what can the Slovakian government do with this tax revenue that's going to improve the national economy? Well, they could use tax revenue could be used to pay off national debt. So they can use that to pay off their national debt. And as a result of paying off national debt, that may mean it's easier for the Slovakian government to borrow in the future. To borrow in the future. So let me just explain what I mean by that and how that actually works. So obviously if Qatar are paying tax revenue because obviously they're operating, they've invested, foreign direct investment has occurred because they're now operating in Slovakia, and by operating in that they are therefore need to pay taxes. They are going to maybe paying corporation tax, which is tax upon their profits that they earn. So the Slovakian government receives this tax revenue. So what the Slovakian government can now do with that tax revenue is they can use that to pay off national debt or government debt. So the government obviously during certain periods of time are going to be spending more money than they actually have, and therefore the government has accumulated debt. But with this tax revenue, they can now put that towards paying off the debt. And what that means is that if the government wanted to borrow some money in the future, what they are more like, other countries are more likely to lend them money for the Slovakian government to then spend, because obviously because they've reduced the amount of debt that they have, they're going to be more likely to pay back the debt or the money that they've borrowed because the debt that they have has been lowered due to the tax revenue. So therefore, if the government wanted to borrow in the future, it's going to be more easier to do so because people are more willing to lend them money because they know that they're more likely to get that money back because their amount of debt that they have is now smaller because they've used the tax revenue to pay off that debt. So a positive impact here within the Slovakian national economy. However, again, we should consider to what extent that is going to be beneficial. As we know, with many multinational corporations, they look for tax loopholes. And what they look to do is they look to minimize tax. So as we've seen with many examples, for example, Starbucks is a really good example of paying really minimum amount of tax. And ultimately, therefore, what's that going to mean? Well, that minimum tax, less tax revenue for the government. Okay. So we've looked at foreign direct investment. We've looked at some positive impacts that foreign direct investment may have, but we've also added that element of caution that foreign direct investment may not necessarily bring the benefits that we have just discussed, with obviously issues with regards to the amount of jobs that are actually created, and particularly with regards to tax revenue, that tax revenue may be minimised or smaller than originally thought of, because the CATA are going to look to minimise the amount of tax that they pay. Okay, so we've had a look at foreign direct investment. That's half of our essay looked at. So now let's look at technology and skills transfer. And skills transfer. Okay, so let's have a look at a positive impact that technology and skills transfer may have on the Slovakian economy. So what we've seen with CATA, they've run a number of they've run an apprentice program in China with 350 graduates each year. So apprentice program in China with 350 graduates each year. And obviously it's quite conceivable that graduate program will be introduced in Slovakia as well. So what does that mean? Well, that's going to increase the skill of the workforce. So you've got more skilled labour within the economy. So what does that mean? Well, these skilled labourers could then set up their own businesses, for example. They've acquired necessary skills that may set up their own businesses, and by them setting up their own businesses, that could lead to an increase in economic growth. Or, alternatively, due to an increase in the number of skilled labourers within the economy, what it may actually attract is further foreign direct investment. So obviously, if multinational corporations see a particular country has a large skilled workforce, they may be attracted to set up there, because obviously they go, well, hang on a minute, this country has lots of skilled workers, we can use them to produce our products. So therefore, more companies may decide, hang on a minute, Slovakia's got a load of skilled workers, we're going to invest in Slovakia, we're going to have a production plant there and utilise those skilled workers. So it may attract further foreign direct investment due to the skilled labourers, and that may lead to further reductions in unemployment, for example. And it may lead to increases in economic growth as well. So obviously, having skilled workers may set up their own businesses, and that may lead to economic growth with regards to those businesses being set up and prospering, people buying from them, the output within the economy increasing. Or alternatively, those skilled workers within the Slovakian economy now may mean that more multinational corporations are interested in having production in Slovakia, and therefore attract further foreign direct investment. It's going to reduce unemployment, increase economic growth, and also it would improve the balance of payments, because there would be significant inflows into the balance of payments. However, there are issues, and it may not necessarily be all as good as we've just portrayed with regards to skills and technology transfer. Because what may happen is it may actually encourage these workers who have now become skilled to actually leave Slovakia. So skilled workers may migrate to other countries to earn higher wages. And therefore, the Slovakian economy is going to have a loss of skilled workers. And therefore, that loss of skilled workers is going to damage the economic growth rate in the long term. So I'll just add that point at the bottom. Damage long-term economic growth. And the reason why it's going to damage long-term economic growth is obviously because if particularly these are young people on an apprentice program who've acquired these skills and then they move abroad with the promise of higher incomes that can be earned, then obviously those skilled workers are now not operating in Slovakia, and therefore the Slovakian economy is going to suffer because the skilled workers have moved elsewhere, and therefore the long-term prospects of the Slovakian economy are going to be damaged. So there is a real issue that skilled workers, yes, if they stay, fantastic. However, if they move to another country, because they've acquired these skills, it may not necessarily be so good. So if we just flip over now, what we can also consider, we can consider other benefits of the technology and skills transfer. So another positive point with regards to the technology and skills transfer is we've seen that Qatar have committed £11 billion in the last 6 years to research and development. So R&D. So Qatar have committed £11 billion in the last 6 years to research and development. Okay, so obviously when they're doing research and development, maybe they're looking at developing some new machinery, for example. New machinery. And this, basically, they're looking at state-of-the-art technology. And what can happen with this state-of-the-art technology that they are employing and using within the Slovakian economy? It may mean that these technologies can be then copied by local businesses or other businesses within Slovakia. Businesses copy the technology. And what that means is, well, if the Slovakian businesses copy the technology and now have a better technology, is that the technology is going to lead to improved productivity within the Slovakian businesses. And that improved productivity is going to lower costs for businesses, and therefore will maybe allow them to charge a lower price because of the improved productivity. Wherefore, what can the firms do? Well, that may lead to an increase in exports, for example. So businesses may be able to export because they are now price competitive. So by Qatar investing in research and developing new machinery, new technology, Slovakian businesses may be able to get access to this new machinery and use it in their production. By doing so, their productivity would therefore rise in Slovakian businesses, and therefore if they're more productive, their costs are going to fall, and therefore they could lower their prices, and as a result that could lead to an increase in exports because those Slovakian businesses are now price competitive, and as a result that's going to lead to an increase in economic growth, and in addition that's also going to lead to an improvement on the balance of payments. And also, if exports are increasing, you may therefore need to hire more workers in order to produce more goods that can be then exported. So obviously we may see reductions in unemployment as well. So really, this skills technology transfer in this case can be really beneficial. It may not necessarily just be the technology. It could be the skills that workers learn and then take into Slovakian businesses. So a worker, they could benefit from the training programs. They could then take it to a Slovakian business. That therefore would improve the productivity within the Slovakian business. And then again, that improved productivity would reduce costs, allow the business to reduce their prices because they're more cost competitive. and therefore exports would increase because the business is now price competitive, and exports can lead to increased economic growth, improved balance of payments, and a reduction in unemployment. However, we must be careful here with regards to multinational corporations. So multinational corporations tend to be footloose. So what do we mean by footloose? Well, what we mean by footloose is that multinational corporations have a tendency to move from country to country. Tend to move from country to country. So therefore, if they only stay in Slovakia for a small period of time, there isn't going to be that much technology and skills transfer taking place. If Qatar only stays a few number of years, therefore there's going to be less technology and skills transfer, and therefore less increases in productivity as a result. So there is an air of caution with regards to these technology and skills transfers taking place because, as I've said, multinational corporates don't tend to stick around for a long period of time. If they did stick around for a long period of time, then the impact would be significant because obviously the productivity would significantly improve. However, if they do move on quite quickly, especially if the wage rate starts creeping up in Slovakia, then that's going to be a real push factor to move Qatar out of Slovakia and move to a country where wage rates are lower. So we've considered both skills and technology transfer and foreign direct investment. So let's just recap our main body of our answer. So we said foreign direct investment was really beneficial to the Slovakian economy because obviously of job creation and how that can reduce unemployment and increase economic growth. However, there was an air of caution that it's very much dependent on the number of jobs created in supplying component parts. If component parts are supplied by Slovakian firms, fantastic. Unemployment is going to fall even lower and economic growth is going to rise even greater. But if they are imported, the number of jobs created in Slovakia is therefore minimal. We did say that foreign direct investment, by operating in Slovakia, it will generate tax revenue for the Slovakian government, and that can allow them to pay off national debt, for example, and therefore make it easier for the government to borrow in the future. But we did say, be careful, multinational corporations tend to look for tax loopholes and minimise the amount of tax that they actually pay, and therefore, as a result, there'd be less tax revenue for the government. Then we looked at technology and skills transfer. We outlined the apprentice programs that Qatar has run previously in other countries and how that increased skilled labour may mean that skilled labourers set up their own businesses, for example. And if those own businesses start producing greater amounts of output and hire people in those businesses, then there's going to be greater economic growth. Or alternatively, that skilled labour may attract further foreign direct investment because other multinational corporations say, hang on a minute, there's loads of skilled labourers in Slovakia, we're going to go and operate in Slovakia and utilise that skilled labour force, and therefore we'll see further reductions in unemployment and economic growth. However, we did err on the side of caution that these skilled workers may be drawn away from Slovakia and maybe to more Western Europe, maybe go to Germany or the UK, for example, where wage rates would be higher, and with their skills they could get a better pay for the job that they complete. So the impact on the Slovakian economy would therefore be quite damaging if they did leave. And then the final point we mentioned with regards to technology and skills transfer was that the idea that Qatar very much at the forefront of research and development, and as a result, new machinery could be utilised by Slovakian businesses if they knew how that machinery operated, or quite simply, if the Slovakian businesses were able to incorporate some of the training, or people who previously worked at Qatar then left and then worked in a Slovakian business, they could provide the skills and technology, and that would improve productivity and making the Slovakian firms more competitive, and that may increase exports and therefore increase economic growth, reduce unemployment, improve balance of payments. But we did say multinational corporations tend to be footloose, they tend to move from country to country, and therefore only tend to stay in a particular country for a short period of time. So our judgment then would be to work out which one is best. So we decide FDI or technology and skills transfer. So either answer is correct. There is no right or wrong answer. And just explain why you chose a particular one. I may be more inclined to say that foreign direct investment may be better in the short run. And it's a good bit of evaluation. Better in the short run because there's initial job creation, and that would quickly help to reduce unemployment. However, I may argue that the skill and technology transfer is a far better long-term, has a far better long-term impact on the Slovakian economy, because ultimately it would improve productivity within the economy, and that should allow businesses to be price competitive. And therefore, if businesses are price competitive, that would ultimately lead to greater exports around the world. And obviously that would reduce unemployment and cause increases in economic growth. So a good bit of evaluation there with regards to comparing short run and long-term impacts. And also you may wish to consider, it depends ultimately whether the ultimate impact, whether one's going to be greater than the other, maybe depend on a number of the factors that we've previously mentioned. So, for example, how long is Qatar going to stay in the country? Are skilled workers going to leave Slovakia? Are Qatar going to source all the component parts from domestic suppliers? Are they going to pay all their taxes? Or you may ultimately argue the impact is ultimately very much dependent on the demand for cars. So if there's a global economic crisis, what we may see is they're going to maybe see a decrease in demand for cars. And therefore, Qatar would shut down all production indefinitely, because no one wants a car, so they're not going to produce them. So ultimately, is there going to be a positive or negative impact? Well, it's going to be very positive if there's a global economy is booming, because everyone's going to want a car. But ultimately, if there's a global economic crisis, there's a decreased demand for cars, and therefore they're going to reduce the supply, and that would cause large-scale unemployment. So, key thing to remember when looking at these type of questions with regards to the impacts of multinational corporations is we're not focusing on the impacts on the business itself. We're thinking about impacts upon, as it says in the question, on the economy. So we want to be linking back to things such as economic growth, unemployment, the balance of payments, for example, improving standards of living, for example. So make sure we are linking back to those factors that I just mentioned and not the impacts upon the business, because we need to make sure we're answering the question.